Bulavinaka, Good, Hello Olgeta, Malawelile, Ali, Telofalava, Hello, Renanim, greetings from Fiji and the Pacific.
Welcome to the 17th Asia Media Summit.
Bulavinaka, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Fiji, the Right Honourable Vorenge Bainimarama, Honourable Ministers of Information of Fiji, Cambodia, Laos, India, Thailand and Samoa, members of the Diplomatic Corps, the AIBD GC Council President, Mr. Mayank Agrawal, AIBD Director, Ms. Philomena Ganana Pragazam, sponsors, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen joining us from around the region and around the world. My name is Amalia Rigsby, and on behalf of AIBD and the Organizing Committee, I'd like to warmly welcome you back to the 17th Virtual Asia Media Summit 2022, Day 2 of Future Forward Reimagining Media Pacific Extravaganza. Yesterday saw a jam-packed, information-filled day with wonderful panelists from around the region give us the insight into different topics of discussion that directly affect us as organizations that work with or around the media. And it will only get better. To kickstart our day, it's my pleasure to reintroduce a young, vibrant contemporary group from Fiji, VO.
Up next, Session 4, broadcasting humane stories in line with Agenda 2030. This session is brought to you by this.
Your window to rising India. India's voice on global platforms. Latest news from India and around the world. In-depth analysis of global headlines. Watch DD India in your country. Available for downlink in all Southeast Asian countries. STTV broadcast is available through the satellite GSAT 17 at 93.5 degrees east. HDTV broadcast is available through the satellite GSAT 10 at 83 degrees east. For technical details, scan here. Switch to DD India now.
और इस गीत के बाद
All India Radio.
won the first prize. ये जनाब बहुत रोमांचक हुई है.
Ahead of the trade negotiations that are slated,
दिवस के साथ-साथ
it has undergone 9 revisions. Fully, with 903 rating points, is 34 points behind Smith. 900.
This is All India Radio. The news read by Anuja Kumar. Namaskar.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're just as excited as I am to get day 2 started. It's so wonderful to see participants joining us from Pakistan, Myanmar, Vietnam, Malaysia, Bangladesh, Turkey, and Fiji. Now, just a reminder to all of our attendees, we'd like to encourage you to please participate in the discussions. You can place your observations or your questions in the chat. Now, kickstarting our sessions off today is Session 4, Broadcasting Humane Stories in Line with Agenda 2030, which is kindly being sponsored by Prasar Bharati. To moderate this session, please welcome our moderator, Mr. Rajesh Singh. Mr. Singh is a Regional Vice President for the Asia Pacific at the Internet Society, a non-profit organization dedicated to ensuring the open development, evolution, and use of the Internet worldwide. In this role, he works with a broad range of stakeholders, including governments, civil society, academia, the private sector, the technical community, and influencers in the Asia Pacific region to promote technologies, policies, and best practices to keep the Internet open, globally connected, secure, and trusted for the benefit of people all across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, our first moderator for the day, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Amelia, and thank you, AVD, for this opportunity. Bula Vinaka, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening indeed for some of you perhaps, and welcome to the to session 4 and the first session for today, of course. I'll just very quickly read a little description of what this session is about, and then I'll introduce my esteemed speakers. We live in a time when people have never had more information available to them, yet it is still difficult for them to understand what are the core issues that shape their social lives. A global challenge for governments and policymakers alike is to analyze the grassroots issues of their respective societies, is a lack of humane stories in mass media. As the media is an essential pillar of democracy and a social watchdog, it is the only way for the public to understand their world. The ability to tell stories has the potential to unite or divide us. And I think we're seeing a bit of the division part of late in many places around the world. In this day and age, the masses cannot afford to be uneducated, especially when it comes to human development issues. It is evident that the success of Agenda 2030 heavily depends on how the media spotlights the key problem areas and disseminates accurate information to its consumers. So that's a nice way to frame this session. And I have 4 very good speakers, I would say, in terms of their background and expertise, but also very diverse in the 4 that I have. Now, the first speaker, which will actually be a pre-recorded message because he couldn't join us this morning, is Dr. Tawfiq Jalasi, who is the Assistant Director General for Communication and Information at UNESCO. Dr. Jalasi was appointed the UNESCO Assistant Director General for Communication and Information in July of last year. In this position, he is responsible for the organization's programs on building inclusive knowledge societies, leading digital transformation, strategizing the role of ICT in education, and fostering freedom of expression. There are larger bios on the website, so I invite you to look up our panelists in further detail. The second speaker is Dr. Atsko Kuda, who's the Regional Director of the International Telecommunications Union Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, based out of Thailand. Ms. Okuda joined ITU in April of 2020, and prior to that, she was the Chief of the ICT and Development Section of the ICT and Disaster Risk Reduction Division of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or ASCAP as we call it, also based in Thailand. At ASCAP, she promoted the development of regional broadband connectivity and inclusive broadband through the implementation of the Asia Pacific Information Superhighway, or APIS initiative. Then we have Mr. Romeo Aka, who is the Assistant Director and Head of Community Relations Division at the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. Romeo is a communication, mobilization, and advocacy practitioner from the Philippines with more than 2 decades of professional experience in both non-governmental and intergovernmental settings in the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Romeo is currently the head of Community Relations Division at the ASEAN Secretariat, and his team is responsible for raising public awareness on ASEAN, media and stakeholder engagement and public outreach. Last but not least, I have Mr. Aaron Kearney, who is currently serving as the Communications Advisor for the Australia-Timor-Leste Partnership for Human Development. Aaron is a multi-award winning broadcaster, photojournalist, sports commentator, and 5-time New York Festival Award winner. He is an AIPS Sports Award silver medalist and the 44th MEAA Prodi Journalist of the Year. He's worked for a number of media organizations in the region, particularly in Australia, including Fairfax, Channel 7, ABC, and others. So those are the 4 speakers I have, and I think we'll start off first with Dr. Jalassi's pre-recorded video message, which is a few minutes long. His video also helps set the stage for what I'm hoping will be the discussion afterwards. We've asked our panelists to spend 7 to 8 minutes just providing their views on what the topic is and their thoughts on that. And then I'm hoping we can get to a Q&A session as well. So if you have any questions or comments and thoughts, please put them either in the chat window or in the Q&A icon if you're participating online, which you will see at the bottom of your screen there. So with that, can I ask our support staff to queue up the video from Dr. Jalassi?
Thank the Republic of Fiji and the Asia Pacific Institute for Broadcasting Development for the invitation to speak at the Asia Media Summit 2022. I am pleased to introduce the session on broadcasting humane stories in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Indeed, the link between journalism and the 2030 Agenda is inextricable. Without free, independent, professional, and pluralistic media, it's hard to imagine a functioning democracy. Media helps us make informed decisions and holds those in power accountable. But the media is more than that. It is what helps us make sense of the world and our role in it. It is largely through media that we can understand and relate to each other. This is why representation matters and why public interest media is so vital to building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. We need media that is free from political, business, or personal interests. We need media that serves all segments of society, in which everyone, especially the most marginalized, can recognize themselves and voice their concerns. We need media that contextualize the global challenges without leaving us hopeless, but instead making us feel aware and empowered. Most of you present here today are media practitioners. You are reporters, editors, and producers, among others. You are on the front line to see that the public interest media is facing an existential threat today. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the economic crisis in the media industry. This has led to the closure of many media outlets, the loss of jobs, and worsen the situation of information-poor local communities. At the heart of this existential threat is media viability. No matter how much we work to ensure the safety of journalists and access to capacity-building trainings, public interest media cannot survive unless journalists can pay their bills. The time for action to address the news media viability crisis is now. What would it take to make public interest media sustainable? There is certainly no one-size-fits-all formula. On the one hand, newsrooms can reinvent their business models, diversify their content, and staff as well as grow a loyal audience base. On the other hand, governments, technology companies, and donors have a role to play too. There is a lot governments can do without compromising editorial independence and integrity, from tax breaks to targeted subsidies to pursuing antitrust cases. At UNESCO, we work with member states and give policy recommendations to help create enabling media environments in line with our unique mandate to promote freedom of expression, safety of journalists, and access to information. This mandate was further strengthened in 2021 when the UNESCO 193 member states endorsed the principles of the Windhoek Plus 30 Declaration, which underlines media viability as a core pillar of information as a public good. UNESCO, through its international program for the development of communication, has been working with partners to diagnose the situation, facilitate exchanges, and advise member states and other stakeholders on the way forward. I invite you all to consult our two most recent publications available online. First, Actionable Policy Recommendations for Governments, a publication entitled Finding the Funds for Journalism to Thrive. And second, a collection of inspiring media initiatives from all over the world called After the Pandemic, Building Back a Stronger Media. The collection of inspiring media initiatives may be of special interest to you as it showcases success stories in areas such as investigative journalism, fact-checking, and new business models. It is also a testament to the tireless energy, courage, and resilience of journalists around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, despite its disastrous effects, the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded the world of the value of journalism, of quality, verified information. The road ahead is long, but the stakes are too high for us not to try our very best. I wish you fruitful deliberations in your following sessions. Thank you.
All right, thanks to Dr. Jalasi for sending us that pre-recorded video message, and I think he raised a couple of very interesting points in his intervention there, and I'm hoping we can come to some of that later in the discussion. Next, I have Atsko, who I believe will be running a couple of slides, so if we could cue that up, and over to you, Atsko.
Thank you, Raj. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Atsko Kuda, Regional Director of the ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, and I'm very, very grateful to be invited to this very important session. I have a slide, if the organizer could show. Next slide, please. For those who may not have been engaged with ITU previously, just to provide a very short overview. ITU is the oldest UN agency specialized in ICT, and we have the mandate to connect the unconnected. And we have three specialized bureaus, as some of you may know, on radio communication, standardization, and development. And I believe that many of you may have been involved in the radio communication part regarding the spectrum management. Next slide, please. So in Asia and the Pacific, we are working on 5 key pillars of activities mandated by our member countries and ITU members, covering the infrastructure, the economy, security, and social inclusion. Next slide, please. So out of all the activities that ITU undertake in Asia and the Pacific, I would like to talk about Girls in ICT Day that ITU celebrates every day as part of the digital inclusion efforts. And this is an example that I would like to share with you today as how, just to demonstrate how we are using different media channels and modality and styles to convey the humane stories. And you will see at the end why we are doing this. So let me just give you the overall background on what is this Girls in ICT Day. The purpose of this celebration is to encourage girls and young women to pursue academic and professional careers in ICT and STEM. As you may know, Asia and the Pacific has one of the highest or more prominent digital divides between men and women. And many studies pointed out that it's partly because there are fewer female students in STEM and engineering and ICT, and we would like to start addressing early on, targeting at young girls and young women to be aware, to be exposed to the great opportunities that ICT present to them. So every year in April, we celebrate the Girls in ICT Day events. So in 2022, under the theme Access and Safety, we have been, as we speak, organizing capacity development, advocacy, and awareness raising among an increasing number of girls and young women in Asia and the Pacific and beyond. And as you see on the right-hand side, this is a year-long celebration, and we started in Indonesia on 21 April, followed by Thailand and Philippines, Cambodia, and we hope to organize it in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the Pacific towards the end of the year. And one of the key activities that ITU promotes together with partners such as UNESCO, UNICEF, is the safety through cybersecurity hackathon, as well as digital skills training. And we hope that interested girls and young women will decide to explore various opportunities on their own. So these are some of the photos that we took from the Girls in ICT Day Thailand events, and it was a hybrid event supported by the female leaders in ICT, such as Ms. Mira Taiva in Indonesia, as well as the additional secretary from the Pakistan, as well as the commissioner in NBTC. Next slide, please. So the most important part in my presentation is how we are using different media to convey and to encourage girls and young women to be interested in this important topic. So as you see, we encourage the participating girls and women to share the posts and tweets on their social media account. And as you see, we got interesting comments. Unfortunately, it is in Thai, but that really shows, what they thought about this event, what they can do, what they want to do to pursue ICT career. Next slide, please. And additionally, we thank you. Develop videos based on the interviews that we conducted from the participants. And we have a very short video that we can show if the organizer can click. And what's just to hear what girls and young women as well as teacher said about being involved and having participated in this event.
Thanks to the great activity to farm girls in ICT that help to push more women into IT roles. I will apply the skill that I have learned and share them with friends. One day, I hope to be as good as the hero models who did the training. Thank you.
After I participate cybersecurity class, I think I have gained a lot of knowledge and experience. Like I used to post or like and share some funny things of my friends, but my mindset is changed now because sometimes it is fun for me, but it's not okay for my friends. And I think I will tell anyone that don't share silly photo of your friends and please share just the good thing indeed. Thank you.
As a teacher, I will tell you that I will motivate and activate my students to aware of using ICT because I know that ICT is very important and useful, right, for the future life of my student. So the more we know ICT, the more opportunity they will get in the future world.
Thank you. So sometimes we feel that the voices of the beneficiaries and young girls and young women are very, very powerful and convey really the message that this is important to bridge the gender digital divide and to really accelerate the digital inclusion. Next slide, please. And additionally, it's not only girls and young women who can change, it's about policymakers and leaders in industry and government. And for them, we from time to time write articles and blogs. And you see on the right-hand side, I had a great opportunity to co-author an op-ed on the Hindu on the gender digital divide. And I also want to add that very recently last week, we managed to get a blog co-authored with UNICEF on this particular topic on digital technology. And I can also add that I also had a privilege to write and co-author a blog with a fellow of AIBD on the importance of utilizing the new media and traditional broadcasting media because different media reached how can I say, reach different audience. And we thought that the combination is really particularly important, especially under COVID lockdowns. Next slide, please. So this is the latest blog I was talking about, which I co-authored with UNICEF colleagues to highlight the importance of this topic in particular in South Asia. Next slide, please. So in summary, I just wanted to add that why we are doing this, why are we using different media, different modality and different styles to convey the message. At the end of the day, a major part of development is behavioral change. And of course, we can organize activities, we can lay the infrastructure, we can put the policy in place. But it is very important, as you heard from the girls and teachers from Thailand, that it is very important that they internalize what they learned and communicate among each other and encourage other girls and teachers to pursue, in our case, a career in STEM. So I just wanted to add that. Before I move on to this another important topic, which is the World Telecommunication Development Conference, ITU is organizing from 6 to 16 June 2022 in Kigali. Together with the conference, we launched this Partner to Connect Digital Coalition to mobilize the resources and partnerships and commitment to connect the unconnected around 4 areas of connecting, empowering, building the ecosystems, as well as incentivizing the investment. Next slide, please. And there is an online platform. We are encouraging various stakeholders such as government, industry, academia, and of course, as well as the media to join us and submit pledges on how you and we can support connecting the unconnected globally. Next slide, please. And this is another perhaps ad to promote what we do with AIBD, and thanks to the support from AIBD and USAID, we could organize a special pre-summit session on cybersecurity and journalism and encourage the female journalists to pursue and to specialize in cybersecurity reporting, because we believe that we need different entry points, different segments of society to engage, to connect the unconnected and to ensure no one is left behind and offline. Thank you. Next slide, please. And that was the last slide. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Back to you, Raj.
Thank you, Atsuko. In the interest of time, we'll move on to with our other speakers, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end. I have a few questions of my own that I'd like to ask our panelists, but let's see how we go for time. Next, I'd like to get Romeo to provide his thoughts and views, and particularly Romeo has got extensive experience in the Southeast Asian sub-region, of course. So look forward to hearing what you have to offer on the topic, Romeo. Over to you.
Thank you, Raj, and good morning from Jakarta. What I'd like to do today is to share with you what we're currently doing at the ASEAN Secretariat in terms of narrating, SDG-inspired stories, and offer a bit of some reflections in terms of our experiences and our challenges. Just to set the context, a little bit of where I'm coming from. As many of you know, the ASEAN community is fundamentally structured along the same core issues propounded by Agenda 2030. So we have the ASEAN political security community, and it's all about peace and partnership. The ASEAN economic community, on the other hand, is about prosperity for all. And the ASEAN sociocultural community focuses on people and planet. We also have one of our key programs called the Initiative for ASEAN Integration, which is meant to narrow the development gap among ASEAN member states so as not to leave anyone behind. In short, the ASEAN Vision 2025, which guides the establishment of a peaceful, prosperous, and socially responsible ASEAN community, is actually complementary to or even mirrors, Agenda 2030. Now, for us in the communication department, one of our challenges is that we know ASEAN is doing a lot to support Agenda 2030 and its own community building ambitions, but we have difficulties in terms of generating those human interest stories that illustrate the issues or progress or even people's aspirations in terms of the specific goals or objectives. I guess it's because we're still in the early stage of developing a culture of communicating our community building process through people's stories, instead of merely highlighting the policies, the structures, that we have developed or are developing. The good news is that we're gradually improving, and we're constantly searching for stories of individuals or communities that have benefited from ASEAN initiatives or making contributions toward ASEAN community building. We believe that this is how we can, build ASEAN closer to the people. Unlike many of you, we're not a broadcaster, but we're using all of our communication channels, including digital media, to bring home the message that ASEAN is building a community where everyone gets the opportunity to live decent, peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable lives. And so recently we have adopted what I would say a friendlier manner to tell the ASEAN development in our, for example, annual reports where we feature sidebar stories of individual citizens. Likewise, the ASEAN Secretariat also publishes the ASEAN magazine, where we try to relate the ASEAN integration or community building process to people, especially those who are non-ASEAN specialists. And almost every story in the magazine focuses on individuals or communities who are either making a contribution towards the attainment of a specific SDG or how they are impacted by SDG-related programs or projects. Even our annual celebration of ASEAN Day gets to be spiced up with stories or narratives of individuals or families. Like last year, we focused on people with disability and how they're affected by online learning. We also want to drive home the message that people are not just beneficiaries of development, but they can also be active participants and agents of development. So we convey this through the stories of individuals whom we see as change makers or champions, like environmental heroes, green warriors, biodiversity heroes, women's empowerment champions, youth leaders, or women scientists, for example. And recently, we have produced podcasts where we featured ASEAN citizens who are doing their bits to achieve these development goals. Our aim is to show that we have real people in ASEAN who are championing these goals. But the challenge here is the possibility that these stories, which focus on individuals, may perpetrate the notion that one person's willpower, drive, passion, or choices are the only factors that explain a successful outcome without highlighting the social or environmental factors that influence such outcomes, which is what the SDGs are all about. Nonetheless, we are aware that human stories are important for ASEAN community building because the community that we are building is one that is people-oriented and people-centered. At the end of the day, we know that we're able to achieve our objectives if we have actual stories of people who are putting in their stakes or have benefited from our cooperation in the areas of education, health, disaster management, or protecting the well-being of migrant workers. Hopefully, these stories will motivate them to support policies or initiatives that help build conditions for collective growth and progress. Finally, ASEAN community, we believe, is strongest when our citizens get the opportunity to reach their full potentials and contribute fully to the community. And these are the stories that we need to put out to secure our community building process. We're not there yet, but our journey has begun. Thank you.
Apologies, Timor-Leste, as Dr. Atsko will probably attest, has some of the worst internet in the world, and it is invariably particularly bad at this time of day. So I do hope the technology gods and perhaps the ITU are smiling on us this afternoon so that we're able to get through this. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. We are pressed for time, so I won't dive deep other than to say it's so great to be connected to so many of the countries and people that I've spent a lot of pre-COVID time with. It's lovely to be here with you, albeit virtually, and from Timor-Leste, a place that embodies a lot of the challenges that we're talking about here. I wanted to take a really practical approach this afternoon. I know a lot of you who are watching this seminar are practitioners who are at the coalface, are out there trying to do stories in the challenge of the modern media environment. And so I wanted to tackle a real elephant in the room for many people, particularly those working across borders or across socioeconomic divides, and that is, how do we give authentic voice to people to give them their own agency, while at the same time making sure that we are producing content that is meaningful and connective and serves our purposes, as was described right at the start of this seminar, in surviving these tumultuous times. I think this is at the core of the challenge that faces everyone. So next slide, please. This is normally a big workshop that I work through over time and do as a mentoring process. It's quite complicated, but the logic is sound. So I'm going to run through the logic with you today. So we have moved to a place in the world and a time in history where we've recognized that everybody owns their own story. The one thing you are the world's leading expert on is you. You are the holder of your story, you own your experience, and much of the pain of colonial pasts and other injustices, gender inequities, racism, come from people co-opting or diminishing somebody else's story. Well, modern communication channels means there are more ways than ever for anyone to tell their story. Indeed, when the internet first came, that was going to be the great promise, right? Everyone would have their platform. They would be able to make things amazing. And there is really strong pressure for media professionals to get out of the way and let people tell their own stories. Sure, makes sense for all the reasons that I've just said, but there's a challenge, as we'll explore on the next slide, please. We have to ask ourselves, who is listening if we give voice to everyone? If it was as simple as just giving voice to people, as modern platforms now do, then every hungry child, every mistreated woman, every act of racial discrimination would result in the victim telling their own story from their own perspective, attract a huge audience, and a torrent of outrage and action would immediately follow. But this is a million miles from the world that we live in, right? So why is that? Let's explore that concept. Next slide, please. Yes, so worthy and authentic, that is, telling your own story, are not the same as engaging. So this challenge, or this apparent disappointment that people aren't able to get humane stories into the world and start tackling the 2030 agenda in the way that we'd like, is, ironically, great news for professional storytellers. It means that we still matter. Our skills in tailoring stories to audiences remain highly valuable. We are the connection between authentic stories gathered in the real world and told by real people. We connect those things to engaged audiences and hopefully deliver genuine impact. Next slide, please. So this is the challenge that is presented to me, to you, and to everybody who wants to be relevant in the future of how stories are told, how humane stories are told, and how journalism and broadcasting is used to address the challenges of the future. You and I need to find a way to empower and amplify authentic voices sharing real stories. We need to give agency and power to people to tell their own stories, but then we need to use our skills and our knowledge to make it connect to audience. Next page, please. So here is the logic that I'm looking to summarize here. Modern humane storytelling is about empowered storytelling. It's not about somebody like me going to somewhere in the world and telling a young woman's story on her behalf, being her voice. Modern humane storytelling is empowered storytelling. Empowered storytelling means authentic stories told from the heart that affect in the ways, as Romeo was saying before, affect in ways that policy and documents do not. Authentic stories combined with effective audience engagement equals cut through and impact. And when you get cut through and impact, then the audience grows and loyalty sticks with you, meaning your organization might have a future going forward. Final slide, please. So here is what I would like you to take away from today. The people who you are engaging with, if you're in the communications game for ASEAN, the people who are affected by your programs. If you are, as I am, working for the Partnership for Human Development, the people who are engaging in your programs. Or if you're just out there telling the story of your country, your town, your region. They own their story. That is the modern reality. But you own the storytelling skills. Together, you can combine to own the audience. How do you do that? That's a conversation for another seminar on another day when we have a little more time than I have with you today. I hope that has sparked some thinking and some interest in you, and I'll pass back to Raj and the team so that they can take us into the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Indeed, I wish we had another hour or so because I've got so many questions and comments that we could really do a deep dive on, but Alice, we don't have that much time. But I do, there was a question in the Q&A which I tried to answer. I hope that was good enough. We have just a few minutes left, and I had a couple of thoughts that I had whilst I was thinking about this session early in the week. One of them was just reflecting on my younger days, growing up in rural Queensland, for instance, and elsewhere. And sometimes I do miss those days, and very simply because, I knew where to go to find things that interested me, be they human interest stories, so indeed investigative journalism, which is also unfortunately starting to fade quite rapidly these days in many parts of the world. There were magazines I could turn to, which I knew there'd be some parts of a magazine I would always read every week or month or whenever they came out. Same thing with newspapers. There'd be a section of the newspaper. Sometimes I'd fight my uncles or my cousins to get hold of that, be it the sports section or something else in between, which is more interesting to me. All that seems to have gone away in many respects, right? Because nowadays, also a slight confession, I'm also one of those few people that I know of these days that still gets a newspaper delivered to my house every day. Including a local newspaper as well as a national masthead, because, local, because I want to know what's happening in my community. And of course, the national newspaper, so I know what's happening in the rest of the country and elsewhere. The other thing I do is, as Phil knows, of course, is I listen to a local community radio, which I, patronize here where I live. But other than those, because I was aware of those, I don't quite know where to go to get these human interest stories anymore. We have social media. Yes, you could say there's the digital landscape, but that's a crowded space. It's a 24-hour news cycle, and, it's shares and likes which determine what succeeds and what doesn't succeed, what flows to the top and what doesn't, what trends and what doesn't trend. And then, of course, the other problem I have is that a lot of that is user-generated, which is nice, citizen journalism or otherwise, but it's also a lot of influencer content, right? And there's a lot of promoted content these days. So sometimes, dissecting fact from fiction or myths, as there were, gets very, very difficult. So, Aaron, you perhaps are the most, journalism is your bread and butter still, I think. I remember you from Channel 7 and ABC days, but but beyond that, where do I go to find that human interest story that really matters and which I can use to perhaps amplify or make a difference? So start with you, Aaron, perhaps.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Raj. And if I knew the answer definitively, it would probably be me, not Jeff Bezos, that's flying to the moon in a rocket. But a more genuine engagement for an answer on that is that I think we are in a state of flux, and I think that we are transitioning out of those newspaper days, but we haven't quite found what the destination looks like. Clearly, the halfway house of social media influencing is unsatisfactory, largely because of its lack of transparency. But I think the challenge exists for organizations like mine that I'm currently working for, the Partnership for Human Development, that is funded by a number of agencies and people who wish to exert influence. ASEAN would be similar. Indeed, the ITU would be similar. A good majority of the people listening here in one way or another are sponsored. The challenge is, how do we engage as communicators in the modern landscape effectively, but still with transparency and integrity so that we can be trusted? The days of I spent some time in England looking at this question at a really macro level, and to summarize it down to a tweet, news is now becoming either very big, think BBC and New York Times, or very small, think your local village. All of us fall somewhere in the middle of that, and that's why the challenge continues for us.
Indeed, yeah. And as I said, it's a pity we don't have more time to get into this. I see we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. I had another somewhat related question, which maybe I can bring Atsko and Romeo into as well. And just going on from the earlier thread we just discussed about how the digital landscape has changed so many things and continues to change it. If I think back to, again, my younger days, governments and politicians used to want to try and get a feel of what people thought, temperature of the room, or the pub test, as we call it here in Australia, although the pub test seems to fail these days as well now. Or depends on what
test now.
Yeah, or which pub you go to, I suppose. I don't know. In any case, because the digital dominates the media landscape so much, how does that then start influencing policymaking? Because that's also, it's one of the other framing questions for this session as well. And particularly so when we know the digital media can be manipulated. Sometimes it's the government itself manipulating it, or other forces at play. So any thoughts, Romeo, Atsko, or even Aaron, sorry, if you want to chip in as well, but maybe I thought I'd ask Atsko or Romeo this, since they're both with intergovernmental organizations.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Perhaps I can take the floor first. So the question is the possibility that social media can be manipulated. Is that a question by governments, and how we can ensure that perhaps the messages or people will understand these nuances?
Yeah, so maybe if I can slightly rephrase that, instead of making policy decisions based on what's trending on Twitter or Facebook, you actually look at the actual issues at the grassroots level, right? Because a lot of that trending stuff can be manipulated in how the trends appear on social media, for instance, right? I don't know if that helps.
Right. And I think this is a very important question, to make sure that everyone's voices are heard. And I think at the moment, this is the major issue. I understand that, of course, social media has an influencers and trends and, a lot of topics, interesting topics that people are talking about. But of course, these are talked about with people who are well connected. Right, and as some of you may know, ITU, issued Facts and Figures 2021, indicating that still 2.9 billion people are offline as of 2021. So those social media trends that we are seeing are basically the conversations of 4.9 billion people maximum. And of course, not all 4.9 billion people will join this conversation. So I think, Raj, it's very important that we look at the social media landscape, including these 2.9 billion people who are not participating in that conversation, and to make sure that their concerns are taken into account in policy and decision making, right? That's really what you're asking, I hope. And this is something that cannot be done on social media as we speak, because these people are not connected. So the priority of ITU is, of course, to connect the unconnected. And by the way, Aaron, we are working with Timor-Leste as well to address the connectivity challenges and to make sure that the current technology development will not accelerate the digital divide, because those who will have faster connectivity, and those who are not connected may be slow to join simply because of the market failure. So the first step, Raj, perhaps we should worry about is this major disconnect of 2.9 billion people who are not participating in that conversation. And I'm not sure to what extent policymakers are making decisions based on what is trending on social media, because in Asia and the Pacific, the policymakers know that there is a large, sizable number of people who are not connected, who are underconnected, and who are not participating in social media trends. So perhaps this will come, but I hope that we'll be able to get them connected sooner, and we can build the digital literacy and digital skills among those who are being connected to the internet fast enough. So thank you. Back to you, Raj.
Okay, thanks, Atsko. I'm being asked to wrap up the session because I think we're over time. So Romeo, I'll leave the last word with you on this one. And let me just add to what Atsuko just said. Although I think I hope governments don't just look at Facebook and Twitter feeds to determine where they go, but it's also the case that if I complain about something on Facebook or Twitter, people seem to react to that, be it a company or even a government department, they seem to take that on more readily than if I wrote a letter to them, for instance, right? So there's still a disconnect definitely there. And just very quickly, do you have any thoughts on that, Romeo? And Philippines, of course, is big in this as well. So maybe
just quickly, what I want to share with you is that within ASEAN, I believe there is an awareness that what's trending, on the digital platforms may be the dominant story of, what's happening on the field. And that is why within ASEAN, there is a committee that is dedicated to tackling, what we would normally call fake news. So within the information sector, there is that what we call the task force, which beyond tackling fake news, also does a lot of digital literacy among the citizens, because we believe it's important for people to be more responsible when they post any information. And I think that's where also we come in as part of the ASEAN Secretariat, because what we do is to support the member states in their work by providing some of the empirical data and evidence. Because at the end of the day, I think it's still good to hear the actual voice of people, and we do that in one way or another through all the research and surveys that we do. Because you're right, it's dangerous to be depending on what we see on Facebook or Twitter. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, all. We'll have to leave it there for today, and I'm hoping someday in person perhaps we can discuss this a bit more, or at another venue. Thanks very much, Aaron, Atsuko, Romeo, and of course to Dr. Taufik for all your interventions. I hope you found it useful. I wish we had more time, but it is what it is. So thanks very much. Have a great day ahead to all of you, and back to APD and the Secretariat team.
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for moderating that session, and to all of our panelists. We are so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. Now, with the world slowly moving back to normal and with borders opening all over the world, we'd like to invite you to add Fiji to your bucket list of places that you'd like to visit one day. To give you a small taste of all the places that Fiji has to offer, I'd like to invite you on a virtual excursion of Fiji, courtesy of Tourism Fiji.